Welcome to the Smart Legacy Podcast, your resource for protecting assets and securing your future. Hosted by Stockton and Cant, join us as we cover essential estate planning and elder law topics, such as wills, trusts, and Medicaid planning. Stockton and Cant, your trusted attorney advisors in safeguarding what matters most. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Smart Legacy Podcast, where we talk about wills, trust, estate planning, elder law, and we're going to pick up kind of on a continuation of what we talked about in our last episode. So Sophia Cant, I'm the managing attorney, Sophia. I just, sometimes you step in. But so I'm Glenn Stockton, managing attorney. We have with us here Sophia Cant, who is a partner attorney in the firm. And so we're going to be talking about how we plan for long-term care and specifically Medicaid insurance today. So before we get into it, I just want to encourage you to subscribe and share the podcast. You'll find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, as well as Spotify. You can also go to our website at stocktonlaw.com, where you'll find the podcast as well as the different platforms we're listed on. So, Sophia, we're going to be talking about the Medicaid today, and how we plan for this, and specifically how we do some pre-planning, right? Mm-hmm. We talked about last time, most people don't plan until they're seated at the admissions desk, right? They're not thinking about this stuff. There is no plan in place, and we're in crisis mode. So we can talk about today about pre-plan. But before we do, maybe tell us a little bit about why do we even care? Why is this important?
Yeah, well, why are we even planning for long-term care? So statistics show that 70% of people age 65 and older need some sort of long-term care at some point in their lifetime. That statistic, I think, is shocking because, we know that it's more likely than not that you will need some sort of long-term care at some point in your lifetime. It's relevant. This is a very relevant issue. We talked about before, if you are doing estate planning and you're going through, these are maybe things that you've not been thinking about, how do I plan in the future if I do need long-term care? So, 70% of people, it's huge, a lot of people.
I think it goes back when I first started doing this, and I grew up in the nursing home business. Mm-hmm. My mom was, worked in nursing mm-hmm. homes. She was an activity director. I knew this stuff was important, but I was still very new to this. I was doing estate planning. I had done a plan for someone. So this was a couple I knew well through my Rotary Club, and it was planning for her mom, who was older but doing great, living at home. She was widowed, and I did her estate plan. She then, several years later, the daughter came to me and mom had been gone into nursing care. I don't remember what exactly happened. She was there. And they said, okay, but we've got this all covered in the plan. And I panicked at first, like, was I supposed to do something? Because I knew I hadn't. I really didn't understand the rules because, again, in the marketplace, there's estate planning attorneys and elder law attorneys. Mm-hmm. I was doing the estate plan. I really didn't know a lot about elder law. So I went back and looked at my notes. Was this goal? No, that wasn't even a goal that we had. I went back through everything and said, guys, no, we didn't plan for that. But it hit me at that point, like, why are we not planning for this? Yeah. Because I know the statistics, right? I'd seen those statistics, but nobody's planning for this stuff. And so that's when I said, no, I need to learn these things and how to help my clients protect against this. And so you also went through that, as we've talked previously, I think in our kickoff episode, if I remember right.
I used to, in high school, I got my CNA and CMA license. I was interested in exploring that area, nursing. I knew I wasn't I could never be a nurse. That's a hard job, and the sight of blood just, would make me pass out. But I got my CNA and CMA license, and I decided to work at a nursing home through a little bit in high school, and then through college, I worked at a nursing home, a local nursing home, and I really got to see firsthand what living in a nursing home looks like, and how hard it is for people to, and for families to make that decision to put them in there. I've seen really great places and places that are really like resort style living. But I've also seen places that are not so great and they have a lot of issues. And, if you had an option of where to go, you probably wouldn't go to one of those places. So I've seen all of that. And, I've seen the heartbreak that, getting older and your health failing and needing that it's caused. But yeah, so I've seen that, and it's kind of really steered me towards elder law. And why is this important? Why is this something we want to plan? Why do we need options? And that's kind of where it takes us to this, why do we need a plan for long-term care?
Well, it's come so far because, like I said, I mean, there's still those, nursing homes, if you will, that are out there. Nobody wants to call it the nursing home anymore, but they've got this continuum care. We've come so far. So I grew up. My mom worked as activity director. This was a nursing home in the 70s and 80s, and in Emporia, Kansas, and you were really there because there was no other option. Mm-hmm. But as you said, there's so many great options for seniors today. There are some of them like resort living, the continuum of care that you have, the just the level of care and the amenities that are available, so very different.
People are signing up to move into them before they really need to, right?
Voluntarily.
Right.
And my mom's job as the activity director was to make it as pleasant as possible for the people there. She was doing activities. She'd bring us kids in, but she didn't have everything. It's come a long ways, and we've learned a lot as a society. And as you said, we have clients all the time that voluntarily move into maybe assisted living, and then they've got the continuing care so they can age in place. Right. And there's so many great communities out there today. But it is expensive how we're going to pay for it, and why. And people still, if they can be in their own home, that's typically their choice. But as we know, and that's not always the option. Right. So let's talk about who does need care and
well, you said expensive, right? And I don't think we even talked about how expensive long-term care can be. On average in our area, we see long-term care costs anywhere from give a range on average, $7,000 to $13,000 a month. It can be cheaper if you need less care, if you are healthier. Or it can be more expensive depending on your needs and what you're looking for.
But memory care, skilled nursing.
Right. And maybe it starts out cheaper, and maybe quickly you start to progress and it goes up more expensive. So we're looking on average, $7,000 to $13,000 every single month after month after month for the rest of your life. And that cost increases as your needs increase, but also, inflation, right? Nursing homes, the cost increases. So it is very expensive. And we've got to find a way to prepare for this, because again, 70% of people at age 65 and over at some point will need some sort of long-term care. Having a plan in place and thinking about this ahead of time is really important. When we talk about long-term care too, what is long-term care? Well, that, people, I think traditionally they think the skilled nursing community. And as we talked about, they can, be very nice communities and almost resort style living communities. And I think, it used to be back in the day, people used to just think, Medicaid communities, those are dirty, they're run down, they stink, they're not good places, and you wanted to avoid Medicaid at all costs. And I think we've come such a long way that that's really not the case anymore. You'll find these Medicaid communities, I challenge you, go tour these places. They are really nice. They provide really great care. And also you'll find some communities too that they don't advertise as Medicaid communities, but they have Medicaid beds and they're really nice communities. So I think, just talking about Medicaid, people say, I'm never going to go on Medicaid because I don't want to do that. I don't want to, go to those communities. I want to shift your thinking that those are really nice places, and they can be.
Well, I think, I've definitely seen that shift happen during the years that I've been practicing, because it used to be the place that took Medicaid, by and large, you didn't want to be there.
Right.
But I think several things happened. One, they started building long-term communities on every other corner, and so it became competition. So a lot of these, they preferred the private pay because they were getting more than the Medicare reimbursement rate. But as they started having more competition, they found instead of having a waiting list, they had maybe 10, 15, 20% of the rooms vacant at any given time. Two, the states got smart because they needed bed space. They were, aging population, and they didn't have places. And so they, were now places didn't have to be 100% Medicaid. So there's just been a lot of changes. As you said, there's a whole lot. In fact, I would say the majority of the communities probably in the area, can accept Medicaid, or certainly a large percentage of them. Right. So not everyone does, but even if we're not, we need to be thinking, how are we going to pay for long-term care? So Medicaid is certainly one of the avenues, but it's not the only way. So what are some of the ways people might pay for long-term care?
Well, if you've got enough money and you've got enough to be able to pay $7,000, $13,000, $15,000 a month, if you're one of those fortunate ones, you can certainly privately pay for your nursing home cost. Now, even if you are wealthy enough to be able to afford that and to be able to do that, you'll quickly see that you'll spend that money down, and you'll spend a lot of it down during your lifetime. The average stay in a nursing home, once you enter into, is about 3 years. So if you're thinking about, you're paying that that fee, that cost month after month after month for 3 years, even if you saved up a lot of money and you have a lot of money to be able to pay for that, you're going to spend a lot of it down. And not only are you going to spend it down, what if you have a spouse? And what if they need long-term care at some point? Remember, I'm saying these stats because they're so important, that 70% of people need some sort of long-term care once they reach age 65 and above. And so more than likely or not, your spouse is going to need some sort of long-term care. So you spent that money down on you. Now you've got your spouse.
But even if they don't need care, the fact that we spent the majority of the money taking care of one spouse, there's very little for the other. And it can be scary for the other spouse when you see how fast we're depleting the savings and the resources.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So you can privately pay for your long-term care costs if that's what you want to do. And even if you need to do it for a little bit of time, you can do that. Another option is your family can step in and pay. I don't know many times how often you've had somebody come in and they say, nope, I've got a plan, and my plan is I'm going to have my family pay for my long-term care. That's it.
I raised the rascals, they can pay for my care.
I have not had somebody come in and say that's their plan to pay for long-term care. So, but unfortunately, a lot of people, they find themselves in that situation where that's it. They've got to, have their family step in, and their family ends up paying that $13,000 a month.
Because the kids don't want to move, Mom and Dad. They're comfortable where they're at. They don't want to move that season of life, so they start chipping out of their pocket. Yeah, unfortunately, we do see that too frequently. Right. And it's because people did not plan because they didn't go see the other alternative. By the time they're coming in, and we've seen they've been doing this sometimes for a year, 2 years, where kids are chipping in.
Right. So, and it's a burden, right? It's a burden on the family to be able to pay for that, and they feel guilty to move them too. And so, if we can avoid family paying for long-term care, I think that's certainly something we want to be able to do.
So we've got private pay, we've got kids can pay, so we can private pay meaning you just spend your money till you have none, and then the kids kick in at that point. What are some other ways we might pay for long-term care?
Well, if you are a planner and you planned ahead and you purchased long-term care insurance, long-term care insurance is a fantastic way to pay for long-term care. And if you had done it before you needed long-term care, then you may be in a really great position. You may still have to privately pay a little bit. There's a lot of different types of long-term care policies. You will see, the traditional type of long-term care policy that most people are familiar with. You pay every single month as long as you have this policy. But we start to see that as you get older, the cost of it starts to increase and gets a little bit more expensive. So as you age and you're now having all these expenses, maybe other health expenses, and now your long-term care policy is even more expensive, we see a lot of people, they find not as much importance, that they don't continue paying for these long-term care policies. So we lose it.
Yeah, or they just decrease the benefits so they can afford the premium, and they're
Right.
cutting down on benefits at a
Right.
time in life when we're getting close to needing it.
Right,
Unfortunately, we
right.
see that.
Right. And in these long-term care policies, the traditional type is typically a use it or lose it type policy. So if you don't need it, then you spent all that money, and there's nothing left at the end for your beneficiaries. But you put money into that. But we do see that when I come across people that do have long-term care insurance, I do get excited because it can really help them pay for a lot of long-term care expenses.
I think you said it there. You said help, because my experience, it's generally part of the puzzle. It's a piece of the puzzle. It's not usually the entire solution, right?
Right, exactly. So we've got different types of policies of long-term care insurance. That would be a way. So there's other ways to pay for long-term care. A different way to pay for long-term care, if you are a veteran, a wartime veteran, and you meet the VA's requirements, you may be able to qualify for VA aid and attendance pension. This is, if you are a veteran and you are tuning in and listening to this, thank you for your service. And this benefit is there, and it was originally there just as a thank you. But as the years have come on, and policies have gotten tangled up into the VA pension, this benefit, it's a little bit more difficult to acquire this pension, but it can pay, $2,000 to $3,000 a month in just straight pension to a wartime veteran or their surviving spouse. So this is a benefit I think a lot of people don't know. And, if you are hearing this and you are a veteran, and or a veteran who may be meet these requirements, reach out to us.
Yeah. Or the spouse of a veteran, because
Right,
as she said, spouses of veterans, you didn't have to be married to the veteran during the war. You had to be married to him for at least 1 year prior to the veteran's death. Because as long as the veteran's alive, even if the spouse needs care, they're going to pay the pension benefit to the veteran.
Right.
So, okay, but that's only for wartime veterans. Again, it's a pension benefit.
Yeah.
It's not going to be the full puzzle, but that can be a way to help pay for long-term care.
Right. And then we go to Medicare. Everyone says, "Oh, I've got Medicare. I don't need, I've got my long-term care expenses covered." Well, Medicare does have it is a piece of the puzzle. It does cover some long-term care costs, but it is very minimal in what it actually costs. Medicare is it's like a health insurance plan, right? It just pays for a very small portion of it. Long-term care, it pays for the first 20 days, 100%. If you come from a qualified hospital stay. If you don't come from a hospital stay, let's say you have dementia, now you just need long-term care. Well, Medicare doesn't pay. It doesn't step in there. So if you go into the hospital, you have the qualifying days. You go to nursing home after that, it will pay 100% of the first 20 days and then on through 100 days. But it doesn't pay the full amount. And even though it's paying something, I find it very rare that somebody actually makes it the full 100 days where Medicare actually pays. We see Medicare does not want to pay for long-term care. It's expensive. And so we find, if you're not progressing fast enough or you're progressing too slow, Medicare will say, nope, we're not going to pay for it anymore and kick you off. And now you're left with all the other options that we talked about previously.
Yeah, it reminds me of I think it was Toby Keith who sang the song. I think it came out shortly after 9/11. And he said, I'm not sure I know the difference between Iraq and Iran. And we see the difference where people don't know the difference between Medicare, Medicaid. So Medicare, to summarize, is the insurance we get at age 65, pays for doctor visits, hospital visits, very limited long-term care benefits up to a maximum 100 days, but most people don't get it.
Right.
So Medicare is not going to be our solution to pay for long-term care.
Right.
So tell us about Medicaid.
So Medicaid, and that's really what's designed to be the last resort, but to cover long-term care expenses. So what Medicaid is a joint federal and state program that each state operates a little bit differently. They have a little bit different rules, but essentially what it is, it's a way to pay for long-term care. And so, there's those communities out there that will accept you and accept Medicaid to pay for long-term care.
As we said earlier, more and more communities all the time. So there's
Right.
a lot of them out there
Right.
that now accept it.
Right. So qualifying for Medicare or Medicaid, and I'm doing it now too. But Medicaid, how do you qualify for Medicaid? Well, to get Medicaid, there's essentially really 3 ways to qualify for Medicaid, right? You can spend it all, and we know that that's easy to do. It's very expensive. You can spend it all. You can give it away, or you can put it in a trust. If you give it away, and we'll get into that a little bit more in detail, but if you give it away or you put it in trust, you are subject to a 5-year look back. And so, planning ahead, and this is all coming back to why we need to plan ahead and why we need to plan for long-term care, because if we plan ahead, then, we can do this at least 5 years before we need it. We're in a really good position.
So as we go in, spend it, give it away, or put it in trust. Only 3 options we have. We spend it, we spend it till we go broke, right? We're going broke in a nursing home, because what's our spend down amount? In Kansas, we have to spend down to $2,000 or less, right?
Right.
Missouri.
Yep, it changes. It changes more frequently than Kansas. Kansas hasn't changed $2,000 in a while, but Missouri, it's a close to $6,000.
And set to maybe increase a little bit, but again, not much. You're going to be,
Right.
$6,000-$7,000. It would depend on where the increase ends up, but $5,900 I think currently. So we've gone broke, right? So you can spend it, and if we're spending long-term care, not fun. Go spend it on fun stuff, I guess. But then you're out of money.
Right.
So that's usually not our option. So our only 2 options to qualify then are give it away or put it into a qualified trust. But you said both of those are subject to the 5-year look back.
Right. And so when we think about, what is the 5-year look back? I think a lot of people have heard, 5 years. What does that even mean? Well, when you apply for Medicaid, they're going to take a snapshot essentially of what do you have now? What are your assets now? And they look at everything that you have. And they look at not only what you have, they also look at what your spouse has. Everything, bank accounts, retirement accounts, life insurance policies, vehicles, your house, your rental property, all of that.
The prepaid burial plan, the burial plot.
Right, exactly.
Everything goes in your financial snapshot.
Right. And then they say, okay, what do you have now? At this point, when you're applying for Medicaid, if you have more than what they allow, and if you're a single person, you have more than $2,000, well, you're not going to be eligible. But if you are eligible, they also look back 5 years. So now and back 5 years. In the last 5 years, have you gifted anything away or transferred to a trust, anything in the last 5 years? If you have, well, you've got to account for it now. And there may be penalty period that we have to look at. So, or we may have to, just wait. There's a lot of things that me as a Medicaid and our firm as Medicaid attorneys that we can do to minimize the impact of this 5-year clock. But that is something we definitely have to be aware of, that there is this 5-year look back clock.
Yeah, and I think, it's something that's misunderstood in some ways. And so to summarize, saying they're just taking a financial snapshot of everything you own on the day you apply, but they're also looking back over the prior 5 years. Any money you transferred away to a trust comes in your financial snapshot as if you still had it. Any money you gifted away in the last 5 years comes into your financial snapshot as if you still had it. You don't, but they said if you did, had you not given it away, it would have been available to spend. We're going to count it against you. That does not mean necessarily that we cannot get them qualified for 5 years. It just means we have to count for the assets,
Right,
correct?
exactly.
And I bring it up because I think people sometimes, the kids or spouse will think, well, mom and dad, they gave away the money. It hasn't been 5 years. We just got to wait the 5 years in the private paying, when they should have said, let's go see an elder law attorney because we can help in those situations. But ideally, we have planned in advance, and we've already satisfied the 5-year look back.
Right.
So how do we do that?
Well, we give it away 5 years prior to needing it. And I we can do that, or we can put it in a trust. And we can pre-plan ahead of time by creating a trust that is Medicaid compliant. It follows the Medicaid rules, and it gets it out of your name. Put it in a trust. It's still there. It's still for your benefit. It's there, and it's meant to be for your benefit. There are some rules surrounding a Medicaid trust that you have to be aware of, and you have to be very careful that you don't violate these rules. But if you can do that, if you can work with an elder law attorney, create a trust, protect your assets, and then apply for Medicaid after 5 years. Now you can have Medicaid cover your cost of care, and everything that you've worked for your whole life is protected. And it's not there. A lot of people say, oh, I'm especially children. They say, no, I'm not concerned about mom and dad saving their money so that I get an inheritance. That's not always the goal, is to protect it for inheritance. But one thing is Medicaid. When you're on Medicaid, you typically, what happens is your income comes in and your income goes out to pay for nursing home costs, and then Medicaid covers the deficit. Well, out of your income, you get some fun money. You get to keep $62 in Kansas at $62 a month, and that's your fund money, right? And that number hasn't changed in years. And now, we've got cell phone bills, and maybe you want to have your hair done, or clothes, socks. Nursing homes, we hear all the time that they lose, socks get lost all the time. I know at my house, socks get lost. I can only imagine now doing laundry for that many people. And so that $62 doesn't go a long ways. In Missouri, it's $50. So that's your fund money. If we have created a trust, thought ahead, planned ahead, and we've done this 5 years prior to needing Medicaid, that money, it's there to really supplement that person's care.
Well, I think so. That's one of the things that we look at is we want to make sure, as we go to Medicaid, as you said, it's not necessarily about protecting it so we can pass it on to the kids, having money to supplement our care. But the other thing is we see, one of the spouses needs care. We spend all the money taking care of dad, and now there's very little or nothing left to take care of mom,
right,
because we spent it all, and we can do division of assets. But again, you need to go see elder law attorneys. Otherwise, you've just spent all your money till you haven't had any. Then there's a lot we can do. So let's talk about pre-planning. So Medicaid's going to take a financial snapshot of everything someone owns on the day they apply. They're looking back the prior 5 years. Anything they gave away sent to a qualifying trust comes into the financial snapshot as if we had it. So ideally, we're planning 5 more years in advance. We talked about in a prior episode that by far the most common type of trust we have is the revocable living trust. And if we think of the trust as being like a safe, as we explained it, we've got this safe, the revocable living trust. Mom and dad create the safe. They keep the keys to the safe. They've put their assets in the safe, and they're giving the kids the backup keys, right? Typical scenario.
Right.
Medicaid says, yeah, that's not going to work, right? Mom, dad, you got too much control. You don't get to keep the keys to the safe, if you will. Now, obviously, a trust isn't a safe, and there's no keys. But if we can kind of conceptually think about it this way, Medicaid says, no, you don't get to keep the keys to the safe, right? You got to give the keys to. Who can we give the keys to? Anybody you want, but it can't be you, and it can't be your spouse. Typically, it's one or more of the adult children. They've got the backup keys. They're going to start using them. We're going to give up our keys irrevocably, give up control, right? We cannot be the trustee or the direct beneficiary of this trust any longer. We're irrevocably giving up those rights. And what I tell clients is it sounds scarier than it is when they're like, oh, I lose control.
You give up everything that you have.
Right. So get out of control. And I say, well, let's think through what happens if we don't. You need long-term care. You're going to spend it all till you have none, right? Uncle Sam's going to step in and take all the money. So when do we do this kind of planning? Well, back in our firm, we want to meet with our clients on an annual basis. And part of that annual review process, we're confirming plan choices. We're making sure everything's titled correctly. We're making sure that we're, thinking about taxes and how to minimize the impact of taxes. But we're also asking about health. And what we tell our clients is, as we ask those questions, but if they get some sort of serious health diagnosis, dementia, Alzheimer's, they're starting to have, physical mobility issues or whatever, don't wait till the next annual review to tell us. We can always, accelerate that meeting.
Right.
Let's have the annual review meeting because we're going to give serious consideration to flipping the switch, if you will,
Right.
to irrevocably give it a key, because we want to build that in to the revocable trust so that revocable trust can become the trust that we need when we get there.
Right. And I think, if we're really being honest with ourselves, we can see that our health is starting to fail 5 years before we need long-term care. A lot of people will wait till they're going into a nursing home and they say, I wish I would have done something different. It had to have been 5 years prior. But, 5 years ago, they probably started to walk with a walker, or, there's signs that your health is starting to decline. Maybe you're starting to have some memory issues. And, when is the best time to do this? Well, at least at that point is when you need to start seriously thinking about having a Medicaid long-term care protection trust in place.
Yeah, because it is, as often we're coming in, they've either gotten some sort of diagnosis like Alzheimer's, dementia. They're starting to have, physical mobility issues. They're just starting to have, physical frailty. They're starting to be inclined. And often what we find is they've already started turning over a lot of the duties to the kids anyhow. It's a great time to give consideration. We've built this revocable trust. You've got the key to it, but we built in it can become the Medicaid compliant irrevocable trust when the time comes, but you have to flip the switch. You got to give the keys away. And if you're already starting to lean on the kids more, it's a good time to do it. And what I tell clients, it's not as scary as it might at first sound, because people are like, oh, I've lost control. I've given up the keys. I don't want to lose control. I say, well, we want our clients to be as independent as they need to be and want to be. And so typically in a typical situation, what we do is the money's been in the safe, right, in the revocable trust all these years, and mom and dad had the keys to it. One of them gets, dad gets diagnosed with dementia. We usually, as you said, have more than 5 years. But even if it's not a formal like that, even strokes and heart attacks, those things can catch us off guard. But what we've learned over the years of doing these interviews, even most of the time, if we're being honest, there's been warning signs, and we've seen this. So let's say dad's got this diagnosis. We're going to give serious consideration to flipping that switch, to giving the keys up irrevocably. Wife can't keep it. Neither one of them give the keys. Who can they give the keys to? Anybody they want. They can't keep it, so give it to the kids. But when we do that, we take their checking account, we move it out of the trust back into mom and dad's individual name. We make the trust the pay on death beneficiary, so we don't have to probate it. Mom and dad have access to their checking account. Income comes in every month. We pay expenses. Next month, income comes in. We pay the expenses. And let's say we decide we're going to keep $25,000 or $30,000 in the account as a cushion. You can usually do a lot to protect that.
Right, absolutely.
But even when we can't, when we do this, as you said, it's not. The goal isn't necessarily to protect every last penny. What we're trying to avoid is going broke in the nursing home. So they got $25,000, $30,000, whatever they're comfortable with, that allows them to sleep at night. Income comes in, pay expenses. If their checking account runs low, it's not like the money has disappeared. Where's the money at? What's over here in the safe? It's just you don't have the key anymore. You've irrevocably given it up, right? You gave it to the kids. So you'll have to go to the kids and say, hey, kids, I need some money out of the trust. Can you pull some money out? And what you have to be prepared for is the kids could say,
no. Right.
Dad, no. Remember when I was 10 and you wouldn't let me have that new baseball glove? Guess what? I'm not going to let you. And they could. And I tell my clients, well, if you're concerned about that, don't do this kind of planning, or at least not with those kids. But generally, the kids, they're there, they get that money, and we can help people get qualified for this. And Medicaid gives us a couple of powerful tools at our disposal, even if they are. So if you would talk about the power to remove and replace trustees and change beneficiaries.
Yeah. So we set this trust up. We think that everything is great, and we trust our children, and we don't foresee any problems happening. Well, I think one thing we know as estate planning attorneys is that things always change. Nothing is as you expect it to be. And so it happens where you've trusted a child to manage your affairs and the child fails. Maybe they had the best intentions, but maybe they were just really bad with money. Or, maybe they developed a drug problem, alcohol, for any reason at all. If you you've created this plan, you're not stuck. You as a trust maker, the one who created that, you have a couple power still. You have the power to remove the trustee and replace it with a new trustee. You also have the power to change and replace beneficiaries. So let's say that child decided, no, I'm not going to give you any of that money anymore, even though, I know what this plan was meant to be for. I know that you need it, but I'm not going to give you any of that money now. Well, okay, I get that. You have the power to do that, child, but I am going to remove you as trustee, and I am going to remove you as beneficiary. Maybe I'm going to let you receive a little bit less. So you do get to retain those powers.
Right. And at the end of the day, that's the most commonly used powers. If people are going to modify their estate plan, whether maybe they just had a will, which doesn't help us, by the way, at all for long-term care. Right. But if they're going to change will, by far the most common changes are who are the beneficiaries or who's the executor, who's in charge. And Medicaid says, you get those two powers. It can just never be you, right, and it can't be your spouse. You cannot be the beneficiary. You cannot be the trustee. So it's not as scary as it seems often for people, because I think they're worried that they've lost control. We want them to be as independent. We're going to think through some tax consequences. I don't want to get down to that, but there's a lot we can do, some tax planning things here that people miss all the time. But I think the point from a pre-planning standpoint is that we want to make sure that we're thinking about this in advance, that revocable trust, by far the most common type of trust we have, can become this long-term care, Medicaid planning trust if and when we need it, that we don't have to just start over from scratch. But there's typically more that goes into pre-planning than just the trust. Right. And again, if we're thinking about this stuff in advance, and we know, more than 2/3 of people are going to need long-term care, there's other things we can do. Not all dollars are created equal. So maybe talk a little bit more about what are some of those other pre-planning things that we can do to help put people in a better position so we don't go broke paying for long-term care.
Right. Well, here's the big one, your power of attorneys. Power of attorneys are, essential documents. And I think we'll get into kind of what are essential estate planning documents on another episode. But a power of attorney document, if you don't have a power of attorney document and your health starts to decline and you now become incapacitated, we talked about probate previously. We're going to end right back up in probate court. Now a judge is going to have to appoint somebody to manage your affairs. And you can't even apply for Medicaid without us having that power of attorney in place. What I often see too is, if you have a good power of attorney, that power of attorney should have long-term care provisions in the document. If it doesn't have that and you lose your capacity, then now you're relying on what the court allows you to do. And unfortunately, the court really limits how much, I as a Medicaid attorney can protect of your assets. So a power of attorney is a strong and essential document. Even if you don't think that you're going to need long-term care at some point, having that in place is so important.
So in making sure we keep them up to date.
Right.
But, when I first started practicing, all anyone really needed was the general durable power of attorney. And those days are gone. And, we've seen changes over the years of changes in statute. We'll see
that the power of attorneys used to be just a couple of pages long, and I still see them all the time. They come in, and they're not very comprehensive.
There's so many changes along this area. We've got to be comprehensive. It's back to not having the crystal ball. I hope we never need this stuff, but if we do, we want to make sure we're prepared. And a power of attorney is an essential estate planning document. Even when we have a trust. Trusts are powerful estate planning vehicles, but we want to have them. As you said, we'll talk about those more in a future episode on this podcast. So having the powers of attorneys, making sure we keep those up to date, right? Financial power of attorneys get outdated. You need to keep them at least every few years, every 5 years, you got to sign it. In our firm, back to when we do those annual review process, are typically going to have them when they're in for the meeting. Let's re-sign the power of attorney. We don't have to charge them for it because literally all we're doing is changing the date on the signature page. We just want fresh ink on that signature line. But let's get that updated because, there may come a time when we're stuck with what we got. You've lost capacity. But let's keep that up to date. But what beyond that? I mean, from a tax perspective, not all assets are created equal. So often we're looking at, where we spend money. If we've, as we're pre-planning, for tax reasons, how we can use IRAs. It's something we see people miss all the time, the deductions that they can get for paying for care. Other things that you can think of from a pre-planning standpoint, making sure the trust, we keep powers. What are some other?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that we can do as Medicaid attorneys to protect your assets from long-term care, from that financial disaster. So many things, and you mentioned retirement accounts, IRAs. In Kansas, typically, I prefer applying for Medicaid in Kansas over Missouri. IRAs is a huge reason why. A spouse's IRA, if you're the healthy spouse living at home, your entire IRA is exempt from Medicaid spend down. You can keep that. But we'll see, if you're the applicant, you're the one that needs care and you have a big IRA, there's still a lot of things we can do with that IRA, but it's usually not as good, and it's more difficult, more complex, more planning that needs involved. You did mention, there are some tax benefit, things to think through. If you do have that IRA, consider using the IRA proceeds to pay for long-term care expenses. Meet with an elder law attorney, because there's so many things that we can do to protect the IRA from that absolute financial disaster and protect it for your spouse.
So I think a couple important things that came out of that. So one, as you said at the outset, Medicaid insurance, it's a federal program administered at the state level. So it's a joint program with states, and states can apply rules differently to this. They have different spend down amounts, $2,000 in Kansas, $5,900 currently in Missouri. So there can be other things too, and one is the exemption amounts. Which state rules apply? And it's the state in which you receive care. And being here in the Kansas City area where we've got a state line, we get choices. Sometimes people can have as a plan option. And it's only one consideration. Obviously, convenience for family and all those kind of things factor in too. But we can choose to go and receive care on one side of the state line or the other. Even though we may have been a resident of Missouri, if we receive care in Kansas, Kansas law is going to apply, correct? Right. And now we have exemptions. And the first thing I think is, elder law attorneys, we always look at exemptions first. What can we exempt? What can we just take off the table for consideration that's exempt?
Right.
Well, if we've done this planning in advance, all those assets in the trust, we flipped the switch in them, we've done that in advance, that's all off the table, not consideration. What other exemptions do we have? Well, if we didn't make the 5 years, we got the same thing. What can we exempt?
Right.
We can recharacterize assets. We can take an asset that was not exempt and, move money over to the exemption. We can do that. We can move, as you said, it's a little complicated, but if we have more time to plan in advance, it makes it easier. But we can move retirement assets from one spouse to another and now take advantage of the exemptions. So all kinds of things that we can do.
Right.
But the idea is you want to be prepared. You need to be thinking about long-term care, and most people aren't. And unfortunately, most estate planning attorneys, because they're not elder law attorneys, people come in and they don't deal with this until they're seated at the desk, the admissions desk, or they got their foot in the door, and we don't have the luxury of time, so we can pre-plan. So we'll talk in a future episode what happens when we don't pre-plan.
Right.
But I think it's good. Trust, help us do that. So guys, that wraps us up for today on this episode. Again, we encourage you to subscribe and share. You will find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube, or go to our website, stocktonlaw.com, and you can find the podcast there, as well as the various platforms we're on. And so, Sophia, I think we can get you back for next episode, and maybe we can talk about some of the crisis plan. But we also need to talk at some point about our living documents. So, all right.
Yeah. Thank you.
The information provided in this podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship. Laws vary by state, and this podcast focuses on estate planning and elder law in Kansas and Missouri. If you are located in Kansas or Missouri and require legal advice, please contact our office. Otherwise, consult a qualified attorney licensed in your jurisdiction.